Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Communications in the era of COVID-19. It's probably changed a little bit, so I thought I'd reach out to Claire Carver Diaz, who is a PhD. She's a professor at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. She's the founder and lead communications consultant at an organization called ClearDay. And 20 years ago today, she walked into the Sydney Olympics as a member of the synchronized swimming team. So what a fascinating background. Claire, how are you? Welcome to our show.
I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me, communications, how did you become a communications expert?
It's actually an interesting journey and not a tremendously linear one, but I'll tell you the most linear story I can tell. When I was an athlete, I was really interested in coaching, in the role of the coach. So the fact that we were these 8 women in the water, and there was this person outside of the water who had a bird's eye view, would give us guidance, would help us communicate with one another, would fine tune our performance. But I thought I was going to be an academic. So I went on to do a master's degree and then eventually a PhD. And I started to enter the workforce. So I started to see the need for this combination of coaching and really effective communication in business. And I started my own business back in 2003, 2004, and have been growing it ever since. So I help business leaders communicate more effectively about their strategy and help their team communicate more effectively with one another.
Now, was your master's and PhD in communications?
It was in English literature, but I always had a specialization or an interest in the communication side of that.
Oh, okay. And now you're what, professor at UTM, and what do you profess in?
I profess. I work in 2 departments at UTM, at University of Toronto, Mississauga. I work in the ICCIT department, which is essentially technology and communication, and I teach career strategies. So through a communications lens, that helps students really make the practical transition from academic life to a successful career beyond university. And I also teach in the management department, presentation skills for management.
So the headline that we wanted to talk about, and let's come back and talk more about basic communication later on in our chat, but has it changed? Has communications changed in this era of COVID-19? We're talking on Zoom. It seems like I've got Zoom meetings going on, Microsoft Work meetings going on, group things, Teams, programs I didn't even know existed 6 months ago. Is that the new normal?
I think it's the in-between normal. So has communication changed? No, it's never changed. But the medium through which we communicate is shifting. So what I'm finding is, we've all moved more permanently, right now at least, into this virtual medium, and we need to learn how to add back in all of those amazing layers of communication that we have live, that for some reason, well, I know the reason, when we sit in front of a screen, we're pretty passive because that's the way we have interacted with screens since we were little kids, right? We sit in front of there, we absorb, we're pretty inactive, not very lively. It's just this passive sort of interaction. And so right now we need to learn, how do we operate in this environment and add those layers back in?
Now, you use your hands a fair amount, and is that part of what you're telling people how to do?
Yes, I need to tone it down. I need to tone down my hands a little bit. But some of the things I teach my clients about is the proper use of lighting. So if you wouldn't have, and by the way, this is the litmus test I use. I say, okay, if you were in a live setting, would you meet in a dark room with your colleagues? No. So therefore, you should probably have lighting, good lighting, which means lighting on your face, not backlit, where you're the board of shadowy figures, that type of witness protection program, just a silhouette. But make sure you're lit up so that your colleagues could see you. And I teach about, making a reasonable facsimile of eye contact by lining up the camera with your eye line. So it's like you're making eye contact, because we wouldn't meet in a meeting as colleagues and I, face the
And
other
not
way.
have eye contact, right? No
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So I've been working with people. You notice my hand gesturing. I've been working with a lot of clients around adding these things back in and practicing it so that it becomes more natural for this in between normal. And I anticipate that a lot of this will stay to some degree, that we'll move back into some sort of hybrid, yet to be seen. We don't know when, but we will definitely, I think people are seeing the cost benefits of virtual meetings, and that you can actually have a meaningful conversation in a virtual medium. So I think the new normal will be a hybrid, and it will be very dependent on each company.
What about the casual interaction where you're chatting on the way into a meeting or the way out of the meeting? Have we lost that personal interaction with people?
I think we've lost a little bit of it. So I would say the things we've really lost is the popping into someone's office, where you have a question, you could think, I could just go see Joe right now and I could just pop in and have a quick conversation. Or you're at the so-called water cooler and you're exchanging ideas and natural synergies happen. That's really hard to replicate in a virtual environment. And so what we need to do is actually create little space for that. So things like allowing the first 5 minutes of a Zoom call for that type of interaction, planning for that, which I get is not organic, but I think the more we get used to this, it will get easier, right? We'll join the Zoom call maybe 2 minutes early, have that kind of social interaction like you would when you enter a meeting. How's your dog? How's your son adjusting to university life, et cetera, et cetera. But it's going to take time for us to get used to this.
I find that it always happens because inevitably, if it's more than one person on the call, somebody's late. And so therefore, as it was today, and so therefore you end up having that personal chat as you're waiting for that final person to arrive in the Zoom call and the meeting starts. Anyway, we're chatting with Claire Carver Diaz right now. She's a professor at UTM. She's an expert on communications. We're going to take a short break for some messages and come back with Dr. Claire Carver Diaz in just a minute. Stay with us.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're talking about communications in the era, well, communications all the time, but also specifically in regards to this staying at home in my home office and how we got to communicate a little bit differently, because lots of us are faced with that. With Claire Carver Diaz, she's a PhD in English literature, I understand, correct?
That's correct.
Which is communications, and a professor at UTM, and she runs her own consulting company on communications, which is known as ClearDay. And she's the lead communications consultant at ClearDay. Let's roll back just for a second. 20 years ago today, what was it like walking into the Olympics?
The experience of walking into the opening ceremonies is an unforgettable one. It truly is. It's not, for me, it wasn't like the beginning of some amazing 16 days. It was actually the accumulation or the pinnacle of 12 years of training. You walk in, you're surrounded by Team Canada, so you're surrounded by people who are the best at their craft. And when you walk into that stadium, I've never experienced anything like this before. There's this insane roar from the crowd, but the crowd's pretty far away. So it's this roar, but it's distant, so you can still talk with your teammates and cheer. And it was like a lightning storm. So I described it on social media today, like walking with a herd or running with a herd, because you're pretty much running into the savannah. And there's this lightning storm in the distance and this distant roar. And it truly was an amazing, almost magical experience.
And you were a synchronized swimmer, part of Canada's synchronized swimming team?
That is correct. Yeah.
And you had trained for 12 years, you say?
Yes. I started synchronized swimming at the age of 12. I grew up in Montreal, but then moved to Mississauga and was a Mississauga resident. I'm on Mississauga Sports Hall of Fame as well.
Congratulations.
Thank you. When I competed at the Olympic Games. So it was 12 years of a lot of hard work. Even though I only made the team a year before the 2000 Olympics, it accumulates over time.
And any lessons learned from that experience?
The whole Olympic experience?
Yeah, and the 12 years of training and
Yes.
making the team and all that?
Yeah, a lot of experience. I think I learned that you cannot be the top of your game in most pursuits without mastering the fundamentals. So you have to understand and master those basic skills in order to really be able to play with the artistry of something, to make it your own, to make it stand out. So, I actually use that kind of philosophy when I approach teaching and when I approach writing and when I approach communications consulting. I say you really have to understand all the rules before you can play with them and break them and make it your own. And
did you give up swimming after that or continue it or what?
I continued on for 2 more years. I competed at several, World Cup type events, and also went to the Commonwealth Games in 2002 and won 2 gold medals there.
Fantastic. Congratulations. And how did you do at the Olympics? Were you a medaler?
We were, yes. Our team, I did duet and team. So our duet came 5th and our team won a bronze medal.
Fantastic. Congratulations. And because of that, you made the Mississauga Sports Hall of Fame. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And are you still,
I guess it's still fresh in a way.
Are you still active in athletics?
I am so busy with my work and teaching, and I also have 4 kids. So my involvement in sport right now is maintaining basic physical fitness and getting my kids to and from activities.
And are any of them going to be competing in the Olympics?
Hard to say. The oldest is 15, youngest is 9. And, they like sports, but still too early.
And then you went into English literature, and you did a master's and a PhD. I've thought about PhDs in a couple different areas. What the heck is your research topic or research question for a PhD in English literature? Like, what's your research question? Like, was Shakespeare smart?
So my PhD dissertation was actually, so I was in the English literature department, but I actually specialized in creative and critical writing. So when I say communications focus, it was actually a focus on effective writing techniques. And my dissertation was on the athlete as anti-hero in literature. So I looked at sport fiction throughout the 20th century and wrote about depictions of athletes. So it actually combined my interest in sport. So even though I've got like masses of disparate interests, all these different areas, they all kind of fit together. And so you have to look at the big picture and you go, oh, okay, I see the connections now.
Oh, well, one of my other interviews tonight is going to be talking about the Raptors and what they did wrong and who they should be trading for, and how one of the star players may actually be depicted in the last couple of days as an anti-hero. So maybe we should have you on that show.
Maybe.
So then you got into communications and you started teaching at UTM, and you say you're doing 2 courses, one in management and one in some series of 5 letters I've never heard of before.
Communications, essentially.
Okay. And tell me what it is you teach.
So in the ICCIT department, which is this long way, it's like information, technology, culture, communications. I help students understand the skills required. Some people call them soft skills, but I call them primary skills. They're hard to train and they're the least likely to be automated. So skills, leadership skills, communication skills, required to be successful in the workforce, but we also deal with how do you get ready to make that transition from academia, because they're 4th year students in that course in particular, get moved from academia to the workforce. And it is a really interesting interactive group that a fairly large group of students. This is the 3rd time I'm teaching this course, and it's well loved because it's kind of this mix of theory, everything through a communication lens, mix of theory, and then my MO always in life consulting is how do you take theory and ground it in real practical terms. And so that's a little different in the university setting. And so I think students appreciate that kind of practical edge. The other course is presentation skills for management. So part of what I've done through ClearDay as a consultant over the past 15 plus years is work with Olympians, Paralympians, and business leaders on presentation skills as well. And so I've taken all of that knowledge and a lot of theory on how do you convey narrative effectively in presentation formats. And I teach that to the management students who are primarily accounting students. And so it's a really useful skill and one that maybe they haven't developed as much in that particular area of study.
So I'm a chief financial officer. I think that the vast majority of accounting-oriented and financially oriented people that I interact with have no ability to make a presentation. And audit committee meetings are the worst, where you bring in a audit partner or an audit manager and he has to present what the issues are, and it's on a PowerPoint slide, and the PowerPoint slide is written like it's a Word document, and it's got more words than you'd ever imagine on a page, let alone on a slide that's projected on the wall. How do you actually teach managers, particularly financially oriented managers, mathematically oriented managers, to present well? Because so much of life in management today is all about presentation, and regrettably, so much of it is via PowerPoint.
Yeah. Well, I go sort of chronologically through how do you start thinking about a presentation, and then the nitty gritty of types of presentation and how to prepare. And so with the leaders and managers, and I actually, in my consulting practice, the majority of my clients are professional service people. So they're very deep in the weeds, technical people who need to learn these skills in order to be able to convey complicated ideas in really clear ways. And so what I start with, helping them understand that you have to have some big idea that you want to present. Like, what is the main idea of this presentation? It can't be 16 ideas. It's got to be one. And what do you want the audience, there's another question in there, but what do you want the audience to leave thinking or feeling like they need to do? So what's the action you want out of this? Keep those in mind. Every slide you prepare, don't just open up a PowerPoint slide and start throwing stuff in. It's every slide as you're preparing it needs to go through the filter of those two concepts. The other thing people need to think about, regardless of who they are, students or professionals, is who's the audience? Are you presenting financial data, let's say, to a client that isn't in the financial realm, doesn't understand taxation? You can't go really deep, really fast. You got to understand the audience and cater to that particular audience. And, or, is it someone who really, you're a tax guy, you're making a presentation to a tax group? Well, your level of detail is going to be much deeper. So I help students and clients understand that. The other thing that I work on, particularly with financially minded people or numbers people, is that data can be presented in a narrative way. So rather than, and I have clients that do this, just cut and paste an Excel. I'm like, oh, I'm cringing at this. Cut and paste this beautiful Excel file onto a PowerPoint slide and show it and talk through 200 pieces of, statistical data or something. It's, okay, what are the two key things on the slide that back up that big picture that you're trying to accomplish, that action you want to happen? And how do you highlight those without throwing your Excel file on a slide? And so I help people understand, okay, presenting it visually in a narrative way and talking about it in a compelling way. So I challenge a lot of my clients to think more creatively about numbers. And I use examples like, if you're presenting a budget, let's say, and you want to do last year's numbers and this year's numbers and the target numbers for next year, maybe you just put 3 numbers up on the screen and say, these 3 numbers are the things I want you to remember. And maybe as you talk about one, you put in the bar graph under it. There are creative ways to tell the story so that people actually remember what you're saying. But you can never let that big idea that you're trying to get across fall to the wayside. That has to be the check. The litmus check for every slide is, does this relate to the big picture?
Big idea and have a narrative. We're chatting tonight with Dr. Claire Carver Diaz about communication. We're going to take another break for some messages and be right back with you. Stay with us. We're back on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour with Dr. Claire Carver Diaz, professor at UTM in communications and a consultant in communications. We talked about management presentation of finance people, and you also said you do a lot of technical work, and you were talking about how people have to convey technical language in understandable ways. I had this one boss, and I have done work in the pharmaceutical and high-tech business. And he always used to say, you have to be able to explain it to the little old lady in tennis shoes at the bus stop, because if she can't understand it, then you don't understand it well enough, because you got to understand it in a way that people can explain it. And so I thought that was helpful. But the other thing that you said that I find interesting, and you may know that I'm a chief financial officer for an NHL hockey team, is athletes have to become so much better at communications now than they were in the past. And I'm not sure what it would be like for a synchronized swimmer, but I follow a couple of Olympians every day on Instagram that have incredibly good communications skills. With hockey, people want to get to know the players, and they want to get to know the players authentically. And one of the things that they were never taught was how to communicate. And all of a sudden they're thrust into the media spotlight. It's almost as if we need to have communications training for athletes before they become pro athletes. And then they do some incredibly dumb things, whether it be on social media or in media interviews. So how do you deal with athletes?
Yeah, you've hit on a nerve, because for years, I'm a hockey fan, and for years I have been watching and saying, how come they didn't get the level of training that we did at the amateur athlete level? National team athletes get a lot of media training and a lot of presentation skill training if you opt into that. And then I observe them and I say, I don't get it. They say the same thing every night, with the baseball cap down. I can't see their face. There's no emotion. There's no real branding. So they're losing a lot of opportunities for their personality to get out there, for that 8-year-old kid, sitting in their living room saying, that's the hero I want to be. And it always, it just gets me a little bit, because I know that they've got great personalities. I've met some of them, and I think there's so much that they have to offer and so much they have to say, but there's a culture, I think, of that kind of, I would say, underwhelming, we just need to get pucks in nets, we're just going to give 110%, that permeates that environment. That in some other sports, you see a bit more personality. When they get interviewed. For example, basketball players, I would say, often add in a little bit of that personal branding.
Well, the ones that do get that personal brand end up doing far better. From an endorsement deal standpoint, or just the teams can't get rid of them because the fans love them so much. So it's worthwhile.
The example I would give in hockey is PK Subban did a great job of having a bit of a more of a standout personality in different ways, and had his charities that he supported, and that was very much in the public, and I think it's done him some favors over the years. But it is an art. Like, there is a science and an art to get to the place where you can convey a message on the spot, on your feet, while you're running through some hallway from the ice to the locker room. I get that. But I think they could get there if they were challenged to get there.
Okay, so let's talk about today. The world's gone virtual. We talk about lighting. You talk about eye contact. What are some of the other things that you're telling people to do in this new world of virtual?
Well, you notice my overuse of my hands. Now I'm trying to tone them down a little bit. I often say to clients, you need to amplify everything, because of this passive relationship we have with screens. So it's talk the way you would talk if someone was standing in front of you, right? So I'm a fairly energetic speaker. And so rather than just sit here and stare blankly and speak on some monotone to the screen, you gotta be
animated.
Yeah. I move my hands, I move my facial muscles the way I would if, we were live and face to face. And the other thing is, there's just simple things like I've been training clients on learning how to manage online meetings. So they have to be a bit more organized, because there isn't you can't read body language of a lot of the people on the call, on the Zoom call. So you got to figure out, how to pull them into the conversation. And then there's a lot of things like, so easy to be distracted when we're in our home environments and when we're in front of a computer. So the dinging of emails coming in, the telltale like swoosh of an email leaving, and you go, someone just sent an email.
Someone just sent an email when they were supposed to be watching me and listening.
Yeah. Or their phones ringing, their dogs barking. And I get that during COVID, we need to demonstrate a lot of grace for people who have situations where they're with their families and pets and everything. But there are certain things we can do to control the environment we're in.
Okay. What about social media? What do you tell managers about social media?
So I think, well, I'll say right now, more people are online for a longer period of time than ever before in history. And so people have this opportunity. If you can't, I guess my new interest right now is how do you connect with clients and colleagues and prospects in a virtual environment? Like, how do you sell in a virtual environment? How do you build relationships? And the best way to do that is to get active in social media. And in a professional setting, that's typically LinkedIn. So thinking about on LinkedIn, where are my prospective clients? Or if I'm in a particular industry or sector, where are people talking about the things that are meaningful to me as a business person? I go there and I become active. I don't just lurk, and watch things. I read things, I comment thoughtfully on them, I reshare things, I post on things, and you build a kind of audience. And then you can actually build a kind of relationship with people online. And I found the best story after that is at the beginning of COVID, I started following some of my, I'm also doing an executive MBA at Cornell and Queens right now, almost done. But I was following some classmates online. There's a lot of American veterans in my class. And I started to really appreciate some of their notes about transition into the workplace. Like lots of parallels between being an athlete and going to the workplace and being a military personnel and then moving into business. And so I started commenting. And then all of a sudden I found that there was this large swath, lots of these veterans following me on LinkedIn. And I had all of a sudden, this new audience reading what I was writing and commenting on things. And so I think right now is a great time to think about how you can strategically move some of your communications into the social media space and do it thoughtfully. I mean, don't just start liking and posting it all the time, but have some consistency and a kind of general theme that's consistent with your brand. And so that's what I've been doing. And I've actually been seeing, I'm a case study for it works. So, yeah.
Well, I think you've used a language that is unique, and more people need to realize how important it is. You call about, consistent with your brand, and what you are online is a brand and your own brand. And I've seen too many people post, and maybe not on LinkedIn, but on Instagram or Facebook, pictures of themselves completely inconsistent with the brand they want to portray, particularly from a work standpoint. And what suggestions do you have there?
Yeah, I personally separate my personal interactions online and my professional ones. So, but there's still a consistency. Like I would say I'm authentic through both of them. So if a client happened upon my personal Instagram account, it would be fairly consistent with what they would know of me. But for people that have a greater division of those two things, I would say ensure you've got a clear delineation, that you've got let's say your Facebook that's very personal and it's private, and you've got things locked and you only have connections that are in your personal realm. And then maybe LinkedIn should be primarily a business platform, social media platform, where you're posting things that are consistent with that brand you're trying to put across as a business owner or as a consultant, as a CFO, whatever the case may be. and make sure that you have the privacy settings that allow for that. So, I've got my Instagram, that's my personal Instagram, and generally my clients are not in that space.
I think the other thing that people forget is that social media is social, and the key is interaction, and it's not broadcast. It's not just you putting something out there and you're just sending it out, not expecting to have it come back and forth. And if you want people to comment on your stuff or share your stuff, you've got to comment on other people's stuff and share their stuff. And so social media should be social.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's an algorithm too. So the more you participate, your feed your post will come up more prominently and more frequently on other people's feeds. And so I think there is a strategy to it. There's no secret to it. You can just go on Google and say secrets of LinkedIn, and there'll be 10 things you can do to optimize your presence on that platform. And I use it as a kind of interesting way to keep up to date on the areas that I'm interested in as well. So, I'm always looking for really interesting, I keep using the word interesting, really fascinating articles on communication and communication during COVID and the impact of COVID on women in the workplace, things that I'm very interested in. I will go and search for those.
One of the other issues that I have kept coming back to with conversations I've had with people is sort of the informal presentation and meeting presentation, where, when I think about the training that I got in business school, I did an undergraduate business degree and a graduate business degree. I'm sure we did group presentations and things. So we had people like you potentially maybe give us some suggestions on our presentation skills from the front of the class. I don't remember anyone critiquing my PowerPoints, which is a negative because PowerPoint ends up being something that you too often are using as the vehicle for presentation. But more importantly, it's almost this Sherry Sandberg lean in kind of mentality where in business, you spend so much time in meetings and you want to get and you have to get your point of view across in that meeting. And we almost need more training on how to constructively make your point in a group session, in a meeting. Do you train that at all?
Yeah, I do. And I put maybe some undue pressure on leaders to facilitate that. So to demonstrate it first in a meeting, how do you interrupt? How do I invite interruption? That type of thing. And then you can actually train people on proper interruption, thinking on your feet, and understanding your style. So one thing I often say is, because people sometimes think when you're a communications coach or a presentation skills coach, you're trying to create clones, where everybody's going to be presenting in, let's say, an Obama type way or, Martin Luther King type way. That's absolutely not the case. I always lean on, it's got to be authentic for people to trust, right? So you have to figure out what your style is. And same thing in meetings. So the understanding that you're a bit more introverted and you're going to have a harder time thinking on your feet, you're probably going to have to do a bit more prep. And you might have to ask the leader to provide you with the information more in advance. But as a leader, you need to understand your team and say, okay, Susan and Mike tend to be more introverted. So when I create the agenda for the meeting, I'm going to send it ahead of time. I'm going to specify the questions we're going to be discussing so that everybody can prepare, but also so we can get the best out of Susan and Mike, because we know they're going to come with great stuff when they're given a chance. So I say the onus is on leaders to train it and
to facilitate it. No question.
Yeah,
Dr. Claire Carver Diaz, professor at UTM in communication and a consultant at ClearDay. Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. If people want to contact you and get some of your consulting advice, how do they do that?
You can go to our website, clearday.ca, or email me directly, Claire, CLAIRE, @clearday.ca.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. We're going to take another break and come back with some final comments in just a second. Stay with us.